Tonight, we embark on a journey into the tumultuous world of ancient Rome, where the megalomaniacal reign of Caligula pushed the empire to the brink of collapse. As we delve into the intrigue, decadence, and tyranny that defined his rule, we'll explore the psychological, historical, and cultural factors that contributed to his descent into madness. In the heart of Rome, beneath the golden glow of the Palatine Hill, the year was 37 AD, and the Roman Empire stood at a crossroads. The Tiber River shimmered under the moonlight, its waters whispering secrets of an empire teetering on the edge of chaos. The revered Augustus was long dead, and his successor Tiberius had ruled with a grim, paranoid hand, leaving the empire weary and restless. When a young man named Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known to history as Caligula, ascended to the throne at the age of 24, Rome held its breath. He was the son of the beloved general Germanicus, a golden boy with a radiant smile and a promise of renewal. The people hailed him as their savior, a prince who would restore Rome's glory. But the court of Caligula would soon become a stage for madness, where ambition, cruelty, and decadence collided in a spectacle that would haunt history. Caligula's early days as emperor sparked hope. The young ruler, with his sharp blue eyes and golden curls, charmed the masses. He recalled exiles banished by Tiberius, abolished hated taxes, and staged lavish gladiatorial games that filled the Circus Maximus with roars of delight. Senators, weary of Tiberius's purges, praised Caligula's generosity. The streets buzzed with tales of his charisma, how he walked among the people, shared their wine, and spoke of a new golden age. Yet beneath this polished exterior, whispers of unease began to stir. Those closest to him noticed a restlessness, a glint in his eye that hinted at something darker. Was it ambition, grief, or something more sinister festering in the shadows of his mind? 6 months into his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. The court held vigils, and priests offered sacrifices to the gods, praying for their young emperor's recovery. Rome's streets fell silent, save for the murmurs of fear that the empire might lose its new hope. When Caligula emerged from his fevered delirium, he was changed. Gone was the charming prince. In his place stood a man who seemed to see himself as more than mortal. He declared himself a living god, demanding that statues of Jupiter and Mars be adorned with his own likeness. The Senate, once eager to please, now exchanged nervous glances. In the marble halls of the imperial palace, courtiers whispered of strange commands. Lavish banquets where Caligula dined with his horse Incitatus, or nights spent pacing the corridors, laughing at unseen specters. The court became a labyrinth of fear and extravagance. Caligula's whims grew erratic, his temper unpredictable. One day he might shower a loyal senator with gold. The next he'd order the same man's execution for a perceived slight. He built floating palaces on Lake Nemi, their bronze prows gleaming under torchlight, hosting orgies that scandalized even Rome's jaded elite. He demanded that his sister Drusilla be worshipped as a goddess, and when she died he mourned with such ferocity that he outlawed laughter in the city. The empire's treasury bled dry to fund his fantasies. Golden barges, temples to himself, and a bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae, which he crossed in triumph, clad in the armor of Alexander the Great. Yet within this chaos there were those who thrived. The Praetorian Guard, led by the cunning Cassius Chaerea, watched closely, their loyalty wavering as Caligula's excesses mounted. Freedmen like Callistus wielded power behind the throne, manipulating the emperor's moods to their advantage. In the shadows, senators and nobles plotted, their fear of Caligula's wrath warring with their desperation to save Rome. The empire itself seemed to mirror its ruler's descent, a once mighty power fraying at the edges, with barbarian threats looming beyond the Rhine and whispers of rebellion in Judea. Was Caligula truly mad, or was his madness a mask for a deeper, more calculated ambition? Some in his court believed he saw through the hypocrisy of Rome's elite, using fear to expose their cowardice. Others saw a man unhinged by power, grief, or the weight of an empire too vast for one soul to bear. The truth, like the man himself, remained elusive, hidden behind the gilded curtains of a court where loyalty was a gamble and survival a game of chance. As the year 40 AD dawned, Caligula's reign grew ever more surreal. He began to speak of relocating the capital to Alexandria, a city he admired for its grandeur and its worship of divine rulers. The Senate recoiled at the idea, their murmurs of dissent growing bolder in private chambers. Caligula, sensing their unease, doubled down on his divine persona. He ordered a colossal statue of himself erected in the Temple of Jerusalem, a provocative act that inflamed the Jewish population and sparked riots in Judea. Messengers brought news of unrest, but Caligula dismissed them with a wave, more preoccupied with staging chariot races where he himself drove, clad in silks and crowned with laurels. The court's atmosphere grew suffocating. Caligula's inner circle, his sisters Agrippina and Livilla, his uncle Claudius, and his wife Milonia Caesonia, walked a tightrope, never certain when affection might turn to accusation. Milonia, fiercely loyal, bore him a daughter, Julia Drusilla, whom he paraded as proof of his divine lineage. Yet even she was not spared his moods. Courtiers whispered of nights when Caligula raged at her, accusing her of disloyalty, only to weep in her arms hours later. The Praetorians, once the empire's iron spine, grew restless under Cassius Charia's command. Charia, a grizzled veteran, chafed at Caligula's mockery. He had endured taunts about his high-pitched voice, a humiliation that burned deeper with each passing day. In the streets of Rome, the people's love for their emperor began to sour. The lavish games and bread distributions continued, but the cost was evident in rising taxes and empty granaries. Merchants grumbled and plebeians whispered of omens. A blood-red moon over the Capitoline, a statue of Jupiter struck by lightning. Caligula seemed oblivious or perhaps defiant of the growing discontent. He took to addressing the moon as his sister, claiming kinship with the goddess Luna, and spent hours gazing at the stars as if seeking answers in their cold light. One fateful night, during a theatrical performance in the Palatine's private theater, Caligula's laughter echoed louder than the actor's lines. He stood mid-performance and declared himself the true star of Rome, demanding the audience worship him on their knees. Most complied, their faces pale, but a few, senators and guards among them, exchanged glances that spoke of resolve. Cassius Charia, standing at the edge of the torchlit hall, tightened his grip on his sword's hilt. The air was thick with the scent of incense and treachery, as the court of a dying empire held its breath, waiting for the next act in Caligula's unraveling drama. By January 41 AD, the Palatine Hill was a cauldron of conspiracy. The once gilded court had become a prison of paranoia, where every gesture was scrutinized and every word could be a death sentence. Caligula, perhaps sensing the shifting tides, grew more brazen. He declared that he would appoint his horse Incitatus as a consul, a move that some saw as a cruel jest to mock the Senate's impotence, while others feared it was a sign of his unraveling mind. The story spread like wildfire through Rome, fueling both ridicule and dread. Senators who once flattered him now met in secret, their whispered plans cloaked by the clatter of goblets and the drone of cicadas in the night. Cassius Charia, the Praetorian prefect, emerged as the linchpin of the growing plot. His resentment had festered into resolve, and he found allies in senators like Annius Vinicius and the freedman Callistus, who saw in Caligula's chaos a threat to their own power. The conspirators moved with care, knowing that Caligula's spies lurked in every corner of the palace. They chose their moment, the Palatine Games, a festival of theater and spectacle, when the emperor would be exposed, surrounded by crowds and distracted by his own vanity. The narrow corridors beneath the theater, where Caligula often passed between performances, offered the perfect stage for their plan. On January 24, 41 AD, The air was crisp and Rome buzzed with the energy of the festival. Caligula, dressed in a golden robe embroidered with stars, reveled in the adoration of the crowd. He had spent the morning sacrificing to the gods, his hands stained with the blood of a flamingo, an offering he deemed fitting for his divine status. As the sun climbed higher, he retired to a cryptoporticus, a covered passageway beneath the palace, to escape the midday heat. His entourage followed. Milonia Sasonia, clutching little Julia Drusilla's hand, a few loyal praetorians, and a scattering of sycophantic courtiers. The conspirators, led by Cheria, waited in the shadows, their hearts pounding as the sound of Caligula's laughter drew near. The passageway was dim, lit only by flickering torches. Caligula paused to jest with an actor, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Cheria stepped forward, his face a mask of calm, and raised his sword. "For Rome," he whispered, though some later claimed he said nothing at all. The blade struck, and Caligula's laughter turned to a scream. The other conspirators surged forward, their daggers flashing in the half-light. Blood pooled on the marble floor, staining the emperor's golden robe. Milonia cried out, rushing to shield her husband, but the blades found her too. Little Julia Drusilla, barely 3 years old, was not spared. The cryptoporticus, once a place of quiet retreat, became a slaughterhouse. Word of the deed spread swiftly. The praetorians, loyal to their own survival, sealed the palace gates, while the Senate scrambled to convene. Some hailed Cheria as a liberator. Others feared the chaos of a power vacuum. In the streets, the people wept, not for Caligula but for the uncertainty that now gripped Rome. The empire, already fraying, seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Yet, in the shadows of the palace, another figure stirred. Claudius, Caligula's stuttering, overlooked uncle, who had hidden behind a curtain as the blades fell. The praetorians, ever pragmatic, saw in him a pliable successor. As they dragged him from his hiding place, the court of a dying empire prepared to crown a new ruler, unaware of the legacy of blood and madness that would linger. The hours following Caligula's assassination were a sleepless fever dream for Rome. The Palatine Hill, once a beacon of imperial splendor, now echoed with the shouts of soldiers and the wails of courtiers. The blood in the cryptoporticus had barely dried when the praetorians, led by their surviving commanders, declared their intent to shape the empire's future. Claudius, trembling and stammering, was an unlikely savior. At 50 years old, he was a scholar, not a warrior, known for his limp, his drooling speech, and a lifetime spent in the shadows of his more glamorous kin. The court had mocked him, Caligula most of all, calling him a half-wit unfit for anything but dusty scrolls. Yet, in this moment of chaos, the praetorians saw opportunity in his obscurity. A puppet emperor, they reasoned, could be controlled. Claudius was spirited away to the praetorian camp, a fortified enclave north of the city. There, under the flickering light of oil lamps, the guards proclaimed him emperor, their swords raised in a show of loyalty that was as much a threat as a pledge. Claudius, pale and sweating, accepted the title with a mix of terror and resignation. He promised the guards a donative, a staggering 15,000 sesterces per man, to secure their allegiance, a bribe that drained the already depleted treasury further. The Senate, meanwhile, gathered in the Temple of Jupiter, their voices rising in heated debate. Some, like the consul Gnaeus Sentius Saturninus, dreamed of restoring the Republic, casting off the imperial yoke that Augustus had forged. Others, more pragmatic, argued that the empire needed a ruler to avoid civil war. The news of Claudius's proclamation reached them like a thunderbolt, and their dreams of a republic dissolved into grudging acceptance. In the streets, Rome was a city that could not sleep. The people, stunned by the assassination, gathered in the Forum, their voices a cacophony of fear, anger, and hope. Some mourned Caligula, remembering his early generosity. Others cursed his name, recounting tales of his cruelty. The omens that had plagued the city, a blood-red moon, a lightning-struck statue, now seemed prophetic. Priests and augurs hurried to perform rituals, offering sacrifices to appease the gods, while merchants boarded up their shops, fearing riots. The Tiber's banks, usually alive with trade, stood eerily quiet as if the city itself held its breath. Agrippina the Younger, Caligula's ambitious sister, emerged as a key player in the unfolding drama. She had survived her brother's reign by navigating his moods with cunning, but now she saw a new path to power. Claudius, her uncle, was a man she could influence, unlike the unpredictable Caligula. In the Praetorian camp, she visited Claudius under the guise of familial loyalty, her sharp eyes noting his fear and inexperience. She brought her young son Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, later known as Nero, clutching his small hand as she spoke of stability and legacy. Claudius, overwhelmed, welcomed her counsel, unaware that she was already sowing the seeds of her own dynasty. The Senate, though sidelined, was not idle. Cassius Chaerea and his co-conspirators faced scrutiny, their heroic act now tinged with the stain of regicide. Some senators praised Chaerea's courage, but others, fearing retribution from Claudius's new regime, distanced themselves. Chaerea, unrepentant, declared that he had saved Rome from a tyrant, but his fate hung in the balance. Claudius, eager to assert his authority, ordered the execution of Chaerea and several conspirators, a move that quelled dissent but alienated those who had hoped for a gentler reign. The executions took place at dawn, their blood mingling with the dust of the Palatine, a grim reminder of the cost of power. Beyond Rome, the empire stirred uneasily. In Judea, news of Caligula's death brought relief, as his order to desecrate the Temple of Jerusalem was rescinded. But the ripples of unrest continued, with local governors scrambling to maintain order. In Germania, the legions along the Rhine, loyal to Caligula's father Germanicus, muttered of rebellion, uncertain of Claudius's legitimacy. The Parthian border simmered as rival kings saw Rome's turmoil as a chance to encroach. Claudius, though mocked as a scholar, proved surprisingly astute. He dispatched messengers to the provinces, promising stability and reinforcing garrisons, while leaning on advisors like the freedman Narcissus, whose cunning rivaled that of Caligula's old confidant Callistus. Back in Rome, the court began to reshape itself around its new emperor. Claudius, once a figure of ridicule, now sat on the throne, his stammering voice issuing decrees that surprised even his detractors. He pardoned many of Caligula's exiles, restored confiscated properties, and abolished the most hated of his nephew's taxes. Yet the shadow of Caligula lingered. The floating palaces on Lake Nemi were abandoned, their bronze prows tarnished by neglect. The bridge of boats at Baiae was dismantled, its timbers repurposed for grain ships. The Senate, though cowed, watched Claudius closely, wary of another descent into tyranny. Agrippina, ever watchful, positioned herself as the power behind the throne, her son Nero a constant presence at court. The sleepless nights of Rome continued, as the city grappled with its new reality. Claudius, plagued by his own insecurities, worked late into the night, poring over scrolls and consulting augurs as if to prove his worth. The people, too, lay awake, whispering of the mad emperor whose blood had stained the Palatine, and wondering if his successor could hold the empire together. The court, once a stage for Caligula's madness, now buzzed with a different kind of restlessness, a cautious hope, tempered by the fear that Rome's glory was fading, and that the empire, like its fallen emperor, was dancing on the edge of oblivion. The days following Claudius's ascension were a delicate dance of power and perception. Rome, still reeling from the shock of Caligula's assassination, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the gods to pass judgment on its new emperor. The Palatine Hill, once alive with Caligula's extravagant feasts, now hummed with a quieter, more cautious energy. Claudius, aware of his precarious position, moved swiftly to consolidate his rule. His first act was to honor the memory of his nephew, not out of love but out of necessity. He ordered a public funeral for Caligula, Milonia Caesonia, and their daughter Julia Drusilla, though their bodies were quietly cremated to avoid fueling unrest. The ashes were interred in a modest tomb, far from the grandeur Caligula had demanded in life, a final insult to his divine pretensions. Claudius's court, though less ostentatious than Caligula's, was no less treacherous. The freedmen who had thrived under the previous regime, Narcissus, Pallas, and Callistus, now vied for influence, their loyalty to Claudius tempered by their own ambitions. Narcissus, a wiry man with a mind as sharp as a gladius, became Claudius's chief advisor, whispering strategies to secure the emperor's legitimacy. Pallas, overseer of the imperial treasury, worked tirelessly to stabilize Rome's finances, though whispers of embezzlement dogged his steps. Callistus, ever the opportunist, maintained ties with Agrippina, hedging his bets in case Claudius's reign faltered. These men, once shadows in Caligula's court, now cast long ones of their own, their late-night meetings in the palace's candlelit chambers shaping the empire's future. Agrippina, meanwhile, wove her own web of influence. She was a survivor hardened by years of navigating Tiberius's suspicions and Caligula's volatility. Her beauty, sharp wit, and lineage as Germanicus's daughter made her a formidable presence. She cultivated allies among the Senate, charming old patricians with promises of favor while quietly undermining those who opposed her. Her son, Nero, was her greatest asset, a bright-eyed boy of 4 whose lineage linked him to both Augustus and Germanicus. Agrippina ensured he was seen at Claudius's side, dressed in miniature togas, his presence a constant reminder of the Julio-Claudian dynasty's enduring power. In private, she whispered to Claudius of her loyalty, but her eyes were fixed on a greater prize, the throne for her son. The Senate, though stripped of its former glory, remained a battleground of egos and agendas. Senators like Lucius Vitellius, a sycophant who had thrived under Caligula, now pledged allegiance to Claudius, their flattery as polished as ever. Others, like Gnaeus Sentius Saturninus, harbored republican dreams, though they dared not voice them openly. The execution of Cassius Chaerea had sent a chill through their ranks, a reminder that Claudius, for all his scholarly demeanor, was not above spilling blood. The Senate's meetings stretched into the night, their debates lit by the flicker of oil lamps, as they grappled with questions of loyalty, governance, and survival. The memory of Caligula's tyranny loomed large, a specter that haunted every decision. In the provinces, the empire's fragility became increasingly apparent. In Britannia, tribal leaders like Caratacus of the Cativalani sensed weakness in Rome's turmoil, stirring unrest along the foggy frontiers. In Egypt, the granary of the empire, local officials hoarded supplies, fearing famine as Caligula's reckless spending had left the treasury bare. Judea, though calmed by the cancellation of Caligula's temple desecration, remained a tinderbox, with zealots preaching rebellion against Roman rule. Claudius, advised by Narcissus, dispatched trusted generals to these hotspots, but the legions were stretched thin, their loyalty uncertain. The Rhine legions, still mourning Germanicus, sent envoys to Rome, demanding assurances that Claudius would honor their fallen hero's legacy. The emperor, sleepless and anxious, penned letters in his own hand, promising rewards and reforms, though he knew the empire's coffers could scarcely afford them. Rome itself was a city of whispers and shadows. The Forum, once a stage for Caligula's theatrics, now buzzed with rumors of new conspiracies. Some claimed that Caligula's loyalists, hidden among the Praetorians, plotted to avenge their fallen emperor. Others whispered of a mysterious figure, a young man claiming to be Caligula himself, who had escaped the Cryptoporticus and now rallied supporters in the Subura's slums. These tales, though likely apocryphal, kept the city awake as plebeians and patricians alike feared a return to chaos. Claudius, determined to project strength, ordered public works to distract the masses, aqueducts to bring water to the city, a new harbor at Ostia to ease the flow of grain. These projects, though practical, drained the treasury further, and Pallas's ledgers grew increasingly grim. The court's sleepless nights were not merely political. Claudius, plagued by physical ailments and a lifetime of mockery, found solace in his scholarly pursuits. He spent hours in the imperial library, poring over histories of Etruria and Carthage, as if seeking answers in the past. His wife, Messalina, emerged as a new force in the court, a young, ambitious woman whose beauty masked a ruthless streak. Unlike Agrippina, who played a long game, Messalina sought immediate power, charming senators and guards alike. Her influence over Claudius grew, and soon she was placing her own allies in key positions, sidelining Narcissus and Pallas. The freedmen, sensing a threat, began to whisper against her, their late-night meetings now tinged with a new rivalry. As spring turned to summer in 41 AD, a new crisis emerged, one that would test Claudius's fledgling reign and cast a long shadow over Rome. A merchant ship from Alexandria docked at Ostia, its crew bearing grim news. A plague had struck the Nile Delta, decimating villages and threatening the grain supply that fed Rome's million souls. The report, delivered in a sealed scroll to Claudius, sent the court into a frenzy. Narcissus urged secrecy to prevent panic, but rumors spread faster than the emperor's edicts. The forum filled with anxious crowds, their chants echoing into the night, demanding bread and answers. Claudius, his hands trembling, summoned his advisers to the Palatine, where they debated under the stars, their voices drowned out by the distant roar of the mob. Messalina saw opportunity in the crisis. She proposed a grand festival to appease the gods, a spectacle to rival Caligula's gladiatorial games. Claudius, desperate to win the people's favor, agreed, diverting funds from the treasury to stage chariot races and theatrical performances. Agrippina, ever calculating, opposed the plan, warning that it would bankrupt the empire further. The court split into factions, with Messalina's charisma clashing against Agrippina's cunning. The freedmen, caught between them, began to choose sides, their loyalty as fluid as the Tiber's currents. As the festival approached, a new figure emerged from the shadows, a young centurion named Vindex, who claimed to have served under Germanicus and swore loyalty to Claudius. His charisma and martial prowess won him favor among the praetorians, but his late-night meetings with Agrippina raised suspicions. Was he her ally, plotting to elevate Nero, or a wild card with his own agenda? His presence electrified the court, his bold speeches in the Senate stirring memories of Caligula's early promise. Claudius, torn between gratitude and paranoia, ordered Narcissus to watch him closely. On the eve of the festival, as torches lit the Circus Maximus and the city pulsed with anticipation, a cloaked figure slipped into the Palatine, bearing a wax tablet inscribed with a chilling message: "The son of Germanicus lives." The words, scrawled in haste, sent Claudius into a panic. Was it a hoax, a remnant of Caligula's loyalists, or something more sinister? As the emperor stared at the tablet, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, the court braced for a revelation that could shatter Rome's fragile peace. The cryptic message, "The son of Germanicus lives," hung over the Palatine like a storm cloud, its implications rippling through the court's sleepless nights. Claudius, already burdened by the weight of an empire he had never sought, clutched the wax tablet as if it were a venomous serpent. His advisers, summoned to a midnight council in the imperial chambers, stood in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the flicker of oil lamps. Narcissus, his sharp eyes darting between the emperor and the tablet, urged caution. "A ruse," he whispered, "meant to sow discord." But Agrippina, seated near Claudius, her expression unreadable, suggested otherwise. "If there is truth to it," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "we must find this pretender before he finds us." Her words, though measured, carried a hint of ambition, as if she saw in this mystery a chance to tighten her grip on the court. The message could only refer to one thing: a claimant to the Julio-Claudian line, a son of Germanicus, Caligula's father. But Caligula was dead, his body burned, his ashes scattered. Germanicus's other sons, Nero Julius Caesar and Drusus Julius Caesar, had perished years earlier, victims of Tiberius's purges. Agrippina's son, young Nero, was the last male heir of Germanicus's blood, but he was a child, not yet 5, and under his mother's watchful eye. The possibility of an unknown survivor, or worse, an impostor rallying Caligula's loyalists, sent a chill through the room. Claudius, his stammer worsening under stress, ordered Narcissus to investigate, dispatching spies to the Suburra, where rumors of a resurrected Caligula had first emerged. The city, already on edge, seemed to pulse with unease as the festival began. The Circus Maximus roared with life, its stands packed with plebeians and patricians alike, their cheers drowning out the whispers of plague and pretenders. Chariots thundered across the sand, their drivers clad in vibrant silks, while actors performed tragedies of Oedipus and Medea, their wails echoing Caligula's own dramatic flair. Messalina, radiant in a golden stola, presided over the festivities, her laughter ringing out as she tossed coins to the crowd. Claudius, seated beside her, managed a strange smile, but his eyes kept drifting to the shadows, as if expecting a dagger at any moment. The festival, meant to unite Rome, only highlighted its fractures. Merchants hoarded grain, priests muttered of divine wrath, and the praetorians stood watch with hands on their swords. Vindex, the young centurion, became a focal point of the court's suspicions. His presence at the festival, clad in polished armor and cheered by the soldiers, drew both admiration and unease. He spoke boldly of Rome's glory, invoking Germanicus's name with a fervor that stirred the legions. Agrippina, ever the strategist, invited him to her private villa, where they dined under the stars, their conversation cloaked by the hum of cicadas. "You served my father," she said, pouring him wine, her eyes searching his face. Vindex's reply was guarded, but his tales of campaigns along the Rhine hinted at a deeper connection to Germanicus's legacy. Narcissus, watching from a distance, reported to Claudius that Vindex's loyalty was uncertain, his ambition palpable. Was he the son of Germanicus the tablet spoke of, or merely a pawn in Agrippina's game? The plague rumors, meanwhile, grew impossible to contain. By the festival's third day, reports from Ostia confirmed that ships from Alexandria carried 6 sailors, their bodies marked with fever and sores. The grain supply, already strained, faced further delays as merchants refused to dock, fearing contagion. Claudius, desperate to maintain order, ordered the distribution of emergency grain stores, but the granaries were nearly empty, a legacy of Caligula's profligacy. The forum erupted in protests, with crowds chanting for bread and cursing the gods. Messalina, seizing the moment, proposed a public sacrifice to Apollo, god of healing, to be held at the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine. The spectacle, complete with white bulls and chanting priests, drew thousands, but it did little to quell the growing panic. Agrippina, ever skeptical, whispered to her allies that Messalina's theatrics were a distraction, a way to bolster her own influence while the empire teetered. Narcissus's spies returned from the Suburra with troubling news. A young man calling himself Drusus, son of Germanicus, was rallying a small but fervent following in the city's slums. His resemblance to Caligula was uncanny: golden curls, sharp blue eyes, and a charisma that drew crowds. He spoke of avenging his brother and restoring the empire to its rightful heirs. Whether he was a true Julio-Claudian or a cunning impostor, his presence was a spark in a city already primed to ignite. Claudius, informed of the pretender, fell into a sleepless panic, his nights spent pacing the palace, muttering of curses and betrayals. Messalina urged him to crush the impostor swiftly, while Agrippina, curiously silent, seemed to weigh her options, her son Nero's future hanging in the balance. As the festival drew to a close, A new omen shook Rome. During the final chariot race, a black raven landed on the spina of the Circus Maximus, its cawing silencing the crowd. Augurs, summoned to interpret the sign, declared it a warning of death and upheaval. The people, already rattled by plague rumors and the mysterious pretender, took to the streets, their chants turning to riots. The Praetorians, led by a wary Vindex, struggled to maintain order, their swords drawn against their own citizens. Claudius, barricaded in the palace, summoned his council once more, his voice trembling as he demanded answers. Narcissus, his face grim, revealed a discovery. The wax tablet's message had been traced to a scribe in Agrippina's household, suggesting her hand in the growing chaos. As dawn broke over a restless Rome, Claudius confronted Agrippina in the imperial gardens, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and betrayal. "What game do you play, niece?" he asked, his stammer barely concealing his fury. Agrippina, her eyes cold as the Tiber's waters, denied involvement, but her smile hinted at secrets yet to be unveiled. Behind her stood young Nero, clutching a toy gladius, his innocent gaze belying the ambitions that swirled around him. As Claudius turned away, a messenger burst into the garden, his face ashen. "The pretender," he gasped, "has been seen at the gates of the Praetorian camp, and Vindex welcomes him." The words struck like lightning, threatening to unravel Claudius's fragile reign and plunge Rome into a new abyss of madness. The news of Vindex's apparent alliance with the pretender sent the Palatine into a frenzy, as if the ghost of Caligula himself had risen to haunt Rome's sleepless nights. Claudius, his face pale and his hands trembling, retreated to his chambers, where he paced beneath the flickering light of a single oil lamp. The weight of the empire, already crushing, now seemed unbearable. The pretender, calling himself Drusus, son of Germanicus, had ignited a spark that could set Rome ablaze. If Vindex, a rising star among the Praetorians, had truly thrown his support behind this impostor, the loyalty of the empire's most elite guard was in question. A crisis that could topple Claudius before his reign had truly begun. Narcissus, ever the shadow behind the throne, took charge of the response. He dispatched a trusted cohort of Praetorians, those still loyal to Claudius, to the camp, with orders to arrest Vindex and the pretender. But the camp, a sprawling fortress of tents and stone walls north of the city, was a world unto itself, where the Praetorians' word was law. As the cohort approached under cover of darkness, they found the gates barred, and Vindex himself standing atop the ramparts, his armor glinting in the moonlight. Beside him stood the young man known as Drusus, his golden curls catching the torchlight, his voice ringing out with a charisma that echoed Caligula's early days. "Rome deserves a true heir," he proclaimed, his words carrying to the gathered soldiers, who cheered with a fervor that sent chills through Claudius's spies. The pretender's speech was a masterstroke, weaving tales of Germanicus's valor and Caligula's betrayed promise. He claimed to be Drusus, son of Germanicus, spared from Tiberius's purges by loyal retainers who had hidden him in the provinces. His story, though improbable, resonated with the Praetorians, many of whom had served under Germanicus and still revered his memory. Vindex, his eyes blazing with conviction, declared his support, calling the pretender the rightful Caesar. Whether Vindex believed the man's claim or saw him as a means to power, none could say. But the sight of Praetorian shields raised in salute sent panic rippling through the Palatine. Claudius, informed of the standoff, summoned his council to the imperial audience hall, a cavernous chamber lined with marble busts of past emperors. The air was thick with tension, the scent of incense mingling with the sweat of fear. Messalina, her golden stola now replaced by a somber cloak, urged immediate action. "Crush them," she hissed, her eyes flashing. "Let the Praetorians see the cost of betrayal." Agrippina, however, counseled restraint, her voice calm but laced with calculation. "If this Drusus is an impostor, expose him," she said. "If he is true, we must know his allies." Her words, though reasonable, carried a weight that made Claudius pause. The revelation that the wax tablet had come from her household had not been forgotten, and Narcissus's gaze lingered on her, searching for signs of treachery. The plague, meanwhile, crept closer to Rome. Reports from Ostia grew dire. Entire crews of grain ships had succumbed, their bodies piled on the docks, awaiting hurried cremation. The Tiber, once a lifeline, now carried whispers of contagion, as fishermen reported bloated corpses drifting downstream. The Forum's riots escalated, with mobs storming granaries and clashing with city cohorts. Claudius, desperate to maintain order, ordered the distribution of what little grain remained, but the sight of empty storehouses only fueled the people's fury. Priests, their robes stained with sacrificial blood, proclaimed the plague a punishment for Caligula's blasphemy, urging mass offerings to Apollo and Asclepius. The temples overflowed with desperate worshippers, their prayers rising into the night like a chorus of despair. Agrippina saw opportunity in the chaos. She moved swiftly, dispatching her own agents to the Subura to investigate the pretender's origins. Her scribe, the one linked to the wax tablet, was found dead in an alley, his throat slit. A warning, perhaps, or a silencing of a loose end. Agrippina's meetings with Vindex grew more frequent, conducted in secret at her villa, where the young centurion spoke of restoring the empire's glory. "Claudius is weak," he said, his voice low, "but you, daughter of Germanicus, could lead through your son." Agrippina's response was a smile, but her mind raced. Was Vindex her ally, or was he using the pretender to challenge her own ambitions for Nero? The boy, now 5, was beginning to understand his mother's plans, his eyes bright with a curiosity that bordered on cunning. Messalina, sensing Agrippina's growing influence, escalated her own campaign. She orchestrated a series of public appearances for Claudius, presenting him as a benevolent ruler, distributing bread and coins to the masses. Her charm won over many, but her ruthlessness surfaced in private. She accused several senators of disloyalty, their names whispered to Claudius during sleepless nights. The emperor, exhausted and paranoid, ordered their arrests, their trials swift and their executions public. The Forum, already a cauldron of unrest, became a stage for blood, as heads rolled and the crowd's cheers turned to uneasy murmurs. Messalina's power grew, but so did her enemies, with Narcissus and Pallas plotting to curb her influence. The provinces too felt the strain. In Britannia, Caratacus's raids intensified, with Roman outposts burned and legions ambushed in the fog-shrouded forests. In Judea, the zealots grew bolder, their leaders preaching of a Messiah who would cast out Rome. Claudius, advised by Narcissus, planned a bold move, an invasion of Britannia to prove his strength and unite the empire. Preparations began in secret, with legions mustered and ships readied at Gesoriacum. But the plague's shadow loomed, threatening to derail the campaign before it began. Soldiers whispered of cursed omens, and desertions increased, their fear of disease outweighing their loyalty to Rome. As autumn approached, the standoff at the Praetorian camp reached a breaking point. Claudius, urged by Messalina, sent a second cohort to confront Vindex, this time led by a loyal tribune named Burrus. The clash was swift and bloody, with Vindex's supporters fighting fiercely to protect their new Caesar. The pretender, Drusus, stood at the camp's center, rallying the men with promises of glory and vengeance. But Burrus's cohort, disciplined and well-armed, overwhelmed the rebels, capturing Vindex and dragging the pretender in chains to the Palatine. The camp, once a symbol of imperial might, was stained with the blood of its own guards, a grim echo of Caligula's fate. The pretender's arrival at the palace sent shockwaves through the court. Claudius, flanked by Messalina and Agrippina, confronted the young man in the audience hall. His resemblance to Caligula was startling. His features, his voice, even his defiant posture. "I am Drusus, son of Germanicus," he declared, his eyes locking with Agrippina's. "I claim what is mine." Claudius, his stammer faltering, demanded proof, but the pretender's story was vague. Tales of exile in Illyricum, of loyal retainers, of a destiny foretold. Narcissus, ever skeptical, pointed out inconsistencies, but the court was divided. Some saw a savior, others a dangerous fraud. As the interrogation stretched into the night, a new figure emerged from the shadows. Callistus, the freedman who had been conspicuously absent. He carried a bundle of scrolls, their wax seals broken, and knelt before Claudius. "These," he said, his voice trembling, "were found in Vindex's quarters. They name Agrippina as the architect of the rebellion, with orders to crown her son Nero as emperor." The court gasped, and Agrippina's face paled, her composure cracking for the first time. Claudius, his eyes wide with betrayal, turned to her, the scrolls trembling in his hands. Before he could speak, a scream echoed from the palace's lower halls. A woman's voice, shrill and panicked, followed by the clash of steel. The court froze as footsteps thundered closer, heralding a new threat that would plunge Rome deeper into the abyss. The scream pierced the tense silence of the audience hall, a sound so raw it seemed to tear through the very fabric of the Palatine. Claudius, clutching the incriminating scrolls, froze, his eyes darting toward the heavy bronze doors. Agrippina, her face still pale from Callistus's accusation, rose swiftly, her hand instinctively pulling young Nero closer. Messalina, her eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and opportunism, stepped toward Claudius, whispering, "We are under attack, my lord. Act now or we are lost." The clash of steel grew louder, accompanied by shouts and the unmistakable thud of bodies hitting the marble floor. The Praetorians guarding the hall drew their swords, their faces taut with uncertainty, as Narcissus barked orders to secure the emperor. The doors burst open, revealing a bloodied Praetorian, his armor dented and his face streaked with sweat. "The Suburra rises," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "The pretender's followers have stormed the palace gates, led by a woman. Livia, they call her, a priestess of Isis." The name sent a ripple of shock through the court. Livia, a shadowy figure rumored to have served in Caligula's inner circle, was known for her fanatic devotion to the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose cult had gained a fervent following in Rome's slums. Whispers of her influence had circulated during Caligula's reign, tales of secret rites and prophecies of a divine ruler. Could she be the force behind the pretender, or was she a new player in Rome's deadly game? Claudius, his stammer nearly choking his words, ordered the palace sealed and the remaining Praetorians to repel the attackers. Narcissus, ever pragmatic, sent runners to recall Burrus and his cohort from the Praetorian camp, but the messenger's report suggested the city was spiraling into chaos. The Suburra, Rome's teeming underbelly, had erupted in violence, with mobs chanting Drusus's name and wielding torches and makeshift weapons. Livia, cloaked in the white robes of an Isis priestess, was said to lead them, her voice carrying prophecies of a new golden age under a true son of Germanicus. The pretender, still chained in the hall, smirked at the news, his defiance unbroken despite his bonds. Agrippina, cornered by Callistus's accusation, seized the moment to deflect suspicion. "This Livia is the true puppet master," she declared, her voice steady despite the chaos. "She uses this impostor to destabilize Rome, not I. My loyalty is to you, uncle, and to my son's future." Her words were a calculated gamble, shifting blame while reinforcing her allegiance to Claudius. But Narcissus, his eyes narrowing, was unconvinced. The scrolls, he insisted, bore her seal, and Vindex's rebellion pointed to her ambition. Claudius, torn between fear and fury, ordered Agrippina confined to her quarters, a move that sent young Nero into tears, his small fists clutching her gown. Messalina, sensing a chance to eliminate her rival, pressed Claudius to act decisively. "Execute the pretender and Agrippina both," she urged, her voice low and urgent. "Their blood will end this madness." But Claudius hesitated, his scholar's mind wrestling with the scroll's authenticity and the growing threat outside. The palace shook with distant crashes as the mob breached the outer gates, their chants of Drusus, Drusus, echoing through the corridors. The Praetorians, outnumbered, fought fiercely, their swords clashing against the crude weapons of the Subura's rabble. Livia's voice, shrill and commanding, rose above the din, calling for the cleansing of Rome's sins. Narcissus, ever the strategist, proposed a risky plan: parade the pretender before the mob to expose him as a fraud. If his story crumbled under scrutiny, the rebellion might falter. Claudius, desperate for any solution, agreed, and the chained Drusus was dragged to the palace's balcony, overlooking the surging crowd. Torchlight illuminated his face, and for a moment the mob fell silent, struck by his resemblance to Caligula. "I am Drusus, son of Germanicus," he declared, his voice carrying over the forum. "I come to restore Rome's glory." The crowd roared, but Livia, standing at the forefront, raised her arms, her white robes billowing. "He is the chosen of Isis," she proclaimed, "sent to purge the empire of weakness." Her words ignited the mob anew, and stones began to fly toward the balcony. The plan backfired. The mob, far from doubting Drusus, saw him as a martyr, and Livia's fervor only strengthened their resolve. Burrus's cohort arrived just in time, their disciplined ranks pushing back the rioters, but the palace remained under siege. Claudius, retreating to his chambers, collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. Messalina, ever opportunistic, took charge, ordering the Praetorians to execute Vindex and the pretender immediately. But as the guards moved to comply, a new report reached the court. The plague had reached Rome's outskirts, with entire households falling ill in the Aventine Hill. The news, combined with the ongoing siege, sent panic through the palace, as courtiers whispered of divine retribution and the end of the Julio-Claudian line. Agrippina, confined but far from powerless, worked through her network of loyal servants. She sent messages to her allies in the Senate, urging them to rally behind Claudius to preserve the dynasty. Her confinement, she argued, was a plot by Messalina to seize power. Her words found fertile ground among senators like Lucius Vitellius, who feared Messalina's growing influence. Meanwhile, Pallas, the treasurer, quietly funneled funds to loyal Praetorians, ensuring their allegiance to Claudius, and indirectly to Agrippina. Callistus, however, remained a wild card, his motives unclear. His accusation against Agrippina had strengthened his position with Claudius, but his absence during the siege raised suspicions. Had he fled, or was he orchestrating a deeper game? The provinces, too, teetered on the brink. In Britannia, Caratacus's raids grew bolder, with reports of entire Roman garrisons wiped out. In Judea, the Zealots seized a Roman outpost, proclaiming it a sign of divine favor. The Rhine legions, hearing of Rome's chaos, began to waver, with some centurions openly questioning Claudius's legitimacy. Narcissus, stretched thin, dispatched envoys with promises of gold, but the treasury's emptiness made such promises hollow. The planned invasion of Britannia, meant to bolster Claudius's reign, was now a distant dream, as resources were diverted to contain the plague and rebellion. As night fell, the palace remained under siege, the mob's torches casting eerie shadows on the marble walls. Claudius, sleepless and haunted, turned to his histories, seeking solace in tales of Rome's resilience. But the present offered no such comfort. The plague spread, the pretender's rebellion and Agrippina's possible betrayal formed a noose around his reign. Messalina, sensing her moment, proposed a drastic measure: declare martial law and unleash the legions on Rome itself to crush the mob. Narcissus, horrified, argued that such a move would alienate the people and doom the empire. The debate raged into the early hours, the court divided between fear and ambition. Then, as dawn's first light crept over the Palatine, a new figure emerged from the chaos. A cloaked woman, her face hidden, slipped past the Praetorian guards and into the audience hall, carrying a blood-stained dagger and a scroll sealed with the mark of Isis. "Livia sends her greetings," she whispered, dropping the scroll at Claudius's feet. The emperor, his hands shaking, broke the seal, revealing a single line: "The true heir waits in the shadows, and Rome will burn for him." Before anyone could react, the woman vanished into the corridors, leaving the court in stunned silence. As the distant roar of the mob grew louder, Claudius realized that the threat was not just at his gates. It was already within the palace walls. Vindex's words, "The true heir is not Drusus, he is here in Rome, and Livia knows his name," struck the audience hall like a thunderbolt, silencing even the distant roar of the mob. Claudius, his hands trembling, dropped the scroll from Livia, its ominous message now overshadowed by this new revelation. The tattered banner of Germanicus, clutched in Vindex's bloodied hands, fluttered in the smoky air, its faded eagle a haunting reminder of a lost era. The court, already fractured by suspicion and fear, stood on the edge of collapse as every eye turned to Vindex, his armor dented and his face gaunt from whatever ordeal had freed him. Messalina, her composure cracking, stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Speak, Centurion, or your head will join the pretenders." Narcissus, his eyes narrowed, signaled the Praetorians to bar the doors, ensuring no word of this moment escaped the hall. Vindex, swaying from exhaustion, steadied himself against a marble column. "I was betrayed," he rasped, his voice hoarse from smoke and battle. "Drusus is a fraud, a puppet of Livia's cult, but there is another. A boy hidden in the city known only to her inner circle. She calls him the child of the sun, born of Germanicus's blood." His words sent a chill through the room as courtiers whispered of prophecies and omens. Claudius, his stammer worsening, demanded details, but Vindex's strength faltered, his eyes rolling back as he collapsed, blood pooling from a wound beneath his armor. The Praetorians rushed to his side, but it was clear he would say no more that night, if he survived at all. The revelation threw the court into chaos. A true heir hidden in Rome suggested a conspiracy far deeper than the pretender Drusus or even Agrippina's alleged plotting. Narcissus, ever the strategist, ordered Vindex taken to the palace physicians, while sending spies to scour the Subura for any trace of this mysterious child of the sun. Messalina, her face pale, seized the moment to press her advantage. "This is Livia's trick," she hissed to Claudius, "a lie to distract us while her mob burns the palace. Execute Drusus and end this madness." But Claudius, his scholar's mind racing, hesitated. The banner of Germanicus, a relic of his brother's glory, stirred memories of family secrets. Could there be a hidden heir, a child of Germanicus or one of his kin, kept secret to survive Tiberius's purges? Agrippina, still confined to her quarters, received word of Vindex's return through her loyal servant, a young freedwoman named Act. The news of a true heir sent Agrippina into a frenzy of calculation. If such a child existed, it threatened her son Nero's claim as the last male heir of Germanicus's line. Yet if she could uncover this heir before Livia, she might turn the crisis to her advantage, proving her loyalty to Claudius while eliminating a rival. Act, dispatched to the Subura, returned with whispers of a secret temple of Isis, hidden beneath a baker's shop, where Livia conducted nightly rituals. The priestess, it was said, guarded a boy no older than Nero, his identity cloaked in mystery, revered as a divine savior by her followers. Agrippina, her mind racing, sent a coded message to Pallas, urging him to infiltrate the temple and uncover the truth. The siege of the Palatine grew more desperate as the fires spread, consuming the lower halls and threatening the imperial archives. The mob, led by Livia's unyielding fervor, had fortified their position in the Forum, erecting barricades of looted timber and chanting hymns to Isis. The pretender, Drusus, now free and among them, rallied the crowd with renewed vigor, his golden curls gleaming in the firelight. His escape, enabled by a traitor within the palace, had emboldened Livia's followers, who saw it as a sign of divine favor. Burrus, his cohort decimated by plague and battle, struggled to hold the palace gates, his men falling to the mob's relentless assault. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh as bodies, both rebel and soldier, piled up in the courtyard. The plague, now rampant in Rome, turned the city into a charnel house. The Aventine and Esquiline hills were hardest hit, with entire streets abandoned as families succumbed to fever and sores. The Tiber, choked with corpses, spread the contagion further, and the city's water supply grew tainted, forcing even the wealthy to boil their water or flee to their villas in the countryside. Priests, their temples deserted, declared the plague a curse for Rome's sins, pointing to Caligula's blasphemy and Claudius's weak rule. The Senate, still meeting in the Temple of Jupiter, debated evacuation, but Lucius Vitellius, swayed by Agrippina's promises, urged them to stand firm, arguing that abandoning Rome would signal the empire's collapse. Narcissus, stretched to his limits, uncovered a troubling lead. The cloaked woman who had delivered Livia's scroll was seen near the temple of Isis, suggesting she was no mere messenger but a high-ranking acolyte. Her blood-stained dagger, left in the audience hall, bore the mark of a rare Egyptian alloy, hinting at ties to Alexandria, where the Isis cult had deep roots. Narcissus suspected Livia's rebellion was not merely a local uprising but part of a larger plot, perhaps funded by foreign powers eager to exploit Rome's chaos. He shared his findings with Claudius, who, sleepless and haunted, ordered a raid on the temple despite the risk of further enraging the mob. Messalina, sensing her influence waning, escalated her campaign against Agrippina. She produced new evidence, a forged letter allegedly from Agrippina to Livia, promising support for the child of the sun in exchange for Nero's elevation. The letter, though suspiciously convenient, swayed Claudius, who summoned Agrippina once more. Escorted from her quarters, she faced the emperor in the smoke-filled audience hall, her eyes blazing with defiance. "This is Messalina's doing," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension. "She seeks to destroy me to secure her own power. I know nothing of this heir, but I will find him and Livia, for you." Claudius, torn between his wife and his niece, agreed to give Agrippina one final chance, ordering her to join the raid on the temple. The raid, led by Burrus and a dwindling band of loyal Praetorians, descended into the Subura under cover of darkness. The temple of Isis, hidden beneath the baker's shop, was a warren of tunnels and chambers, lit by flickering oil lamps and adorned with Egyptian frescoes. The Praetorians, coughing in the smoky air, clashed with Livia's zealots, their curved daggers no match for Roman steel but driven by fanatical resolve. Agrippina, cloaked and armed with a concealed blade, moved with Burrus, her presence a calculated risk to prove her loyalty. In the temple's deepest chamber they found Livia, her white robes now crimson with blood, kneeling before a small boy no older than 6, his eyes wide with fear. "The child of the sun," Livia whispered, her voice reverent as she raised a dagger to defend him. The confrontation was brief but brutal. Burrus's men overwhelmed Livia's guards, and Agrippina, seizing the moment, disarmed the priestess, her blade at Livia's throat. "Who is this boy?" she demanded, her voice cold. Livia's eyes gleamed with defiance. "He is Germanicus's son, hidden from Tiberius's wrath, blessed by Isis to rule." But the boy's trembling form and lack of resemblance to the Julio-Claudian line cast doubt on her claim. Burrus, skeptical, ordered the boy and Livia taken to the palace, but as they emerged into the Subura, the mob surged forward, Drusus at their head, his voice rallying them to rescue their savior. The clash that followed was a bloodbath. The Praetorians, weakened by plague and fatigue, fought desperately to protect Agrippina and their prisoners. Livia, unbound in the chaos, vanished into the crowd, her laughter echoing as she promised retribution. The boy, separated in the melee, was lost in the smoke, his fate uncertain. Agrippina, bloodied but unbowed, led the surviving Praetorians back to the Palatine, Drusus's taunts ringing in her ears. The raid, meant to end the rebellion, had only deepened the mystery of the true heir, and Rome burned hotter than ever. Back at the palace, Claudius, informed of the raid's failure, sank into despair. The fires had spread to the imperial gardens, and the plague now claimed even the Praetorians, with Burrus himself showing signs of fever. Messalina, her power slipping, accused Agrippina of treason anew, pointing to her survival as proof of complicity with Livia. Narcissus, however, uncovered a new clue: a hidden cache of scrolls in the temple, bearing the seal of a Parthian envoy. The scrolls suggested Livia's cult was funded by Parthia, Rome's eastern rival, aiming to destabilize the empire. The revelation shifted the court's focus, but before Claudius could act, a new cry echoed through the palace. A child's voice singing a hymn to Isis coming from the burned-out archives. The court froze as the ghostly song grew louder, and a small figure emerged from the shadows, his face hidden, clutching a golden amulet inscribed with the name of Germanicus. The child's hymn to Isis, haunting and clear, cut through the smoke-choked air of the Palatine, silencing the court as the small figure stepped into the flickering torchlight. The golden amulet, gleaming with Germanicus's name, dangled from his trembling hand, its intricate design catching the eye of every courtier. Claudius, his face ashen, rose from his throne, his stammer forgotten in the face of this new mystery. "Who are you, boy?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. The child, no older than 6, his face obscured by a tattered hood, ceased his singing but did not speak. His eyes, wide and unblinking, darted between Claudius, Messalina, and Narcissus as if weighing their intentions. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant crackle of flames and the mob's relentless chants of Drusus. Drusus! From the forum below. Narcissus, his instincts honed by years of navigating treachery, stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Give me the amulet, child," he said softly, but his tone carried an edge of command. The boy clutched the amulet tighter, stepping back into the shadows of the ruined archives, where charred scrolls and shattered busts lay scattered like the bones of Rome's past. Before Narcissus could press further, a Praetorian burst into the hall, his armor splattered with blood. "The mob has breached the inner gates," he shouted. Drusus leads them, and Livia's voice rallies the Subura. The court erupted in panic, courtiers scrambling for safety as the clash of steel grew closer. Claudius, his resolve crumbling, ordered the boy seized, but the child slipped through a hidden passage, his hymn fading into the labyrinthine depths of the palace. The amulet's appearance and the child's sudden emergence sent the court into a frenzy of speculation. Was this the child of the son Vindex had spoken of, the true heir Livia claimed to protect? The amulet, bearing Germanicus's name, suggested a connection to the Julio-Claudian line, but its authenticity was uncertain. Germanicus, beloved hero of the legions, had left a legacy of loyalty that lingered long after his death, but his sons, save for Caligula and Agrippina's Nero, were known to have perished. Could a child have been hidden, as Livia claimed, shielded from Tiberius's purges? Or was this another of Livia's ruses, a ploy to deepen Rome's chaos? Claudius, his scholar's mind racing, ordered Narcissus to secure the archives and find the boy, while dispatching Burrus, despite his fever, to hold the inner gates against the mob. Agrippina, released from confinement to prove her loyalty, seized the moment to reassert her influence. Escorted back to the audience hall, she faced Claudius with a steely gaze, her bloodied stola a testament to her survival in the Subura. "The child is a fraud," she declared, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Livia uses him to undermine Nero, the true heir of Germanicus." Her words, bold and calculated, aimed to protect her son's claim, but they drew a sharp rebuke from Messalina. "You speak of loyalty, yet your scribe's blood stains the Subura." Messalina hissed, pointing to the forged scrolls that still cast suspicion on Agrippina. Claudius, torn between the two women, ordered silence, his eyes fixed on the passage where the child had vanished. "Find him," he stammered, "and we find the truth." Narcissus's spies, combing the Subura, returned with grim news. Livia had rallied her followers in a hidden courtyard, where she proclaimed the child as the divine seed of Germanicus, destined to rule a reborn Rome. Drusus, the escaped pretender, stood at her side, his charisma undimmed despite his brief captivity. The mob, now numbering in the thousands, had overrun the forum, setting fire to merchant stalls and clashing with city cohorts. Livia's hymns to Isis, amplified by her acolytes, drowned out the cries of the wounded, and her promises of a new golden age fueled the rebellion. The Parthian scrolls found in the temple suggested foreign gold had armed her followers, their weapons bearing the marks of Eastern forges. Narcissus, his suspicions confirmed, warned Claudius that Parthia's hand in Rome's chaos could spark a broader war, one the plague-weakened empire could not afford. The plague, now a relentless scourge, had transformed Rome into a city of ghosts. The Palatine, once a beacon of imperial power, was a fortress under siege, its halls filled with the stench of smoke and decay. The Aventine and Esquiline hills were abandoned, their streets littered with the dead, while the Tiber carried a tide of corpses to the sea. Burrus, his fever worsening, led the Praetorians in a desperate defense of the inner gates, but their numbers dwindled as the plague claimed more lives. The city's water supply, tainted by the river, spread the disease faster, and even the wealthy who had fled to their villas reported outbreaks in the countryside. Priests, their rituals exhausted, declared the gods had turned against Rome, and augurs pointed to a blood-red dawn as a sign of divine wrath. Agrippina, sensing the empire's collapse, moved with ruthless precision. Through Act, she contacted Pallas, who had secured a small cache of gold from the treasury, gold meant for the Praetorians but now diverted to her cause. She bribed key senators, including Lucius Vitellius, to publicly denounce Livia's rebellion as a Parthian plot, hoping to rally the Senate behind Claudius. At the same time, she sent agents to infiltrate Livia's cult, seeking the child who had vanished into the palace. Her goal was clear. If the boy was a true heir, she would expose him as a fraud. If he was Livia's creation, she would use him to discredit the priestess. But her actions drew suspicion from Narcissus, who uncovered her bribes and reported them to Claudius, further eroding her fragile alliance with the emperor. Messalina, her power teetering, doubled down on her campaign to crush Agrippina. She produced a new witness, a terrified merchant who claimed to have seen Agrippina's agents meeting with Livia's acolytes in the Subura. The accusation, though thin, reignited Claudius's paranoia, and he ordered Agrippina's quarters searched. The search yielded a hidden scroll, bearing the seal of a Parthian envoy, suggesting Agrippina had her own ties to Rome's eastern rival. Whether the scroll was planted by Messalina or genuine, it deepened the court's divisions, with Pallas and Callistus now openly at odds, each accusing the other of treachery. Claudius, his mind clouded by exhaustion and fear, retreated to his library, clutching the amulet's description as if it held the key to Rome's salvation. The provinces, too, felt the empire's unraveling. In Britannia, Caratacus's raids had united the tribes, with reports of a massive warband preparing to strike Roman forts. In Judea, the Zealots declared a holy war, seizing another outpost and executing its garrison. The Rhine legions, hearing of Rome's plague and rebellion, began to desert, their centurions refusing orders from a scholar emperor they deemed unfit. Narcissus, desperate to hold the empire together, dispatched envoys with promises of land and gold, but the treasury's emptiness made such promises laughable. The planned invasion of Britannia, once Claudius's hope for glory, was abandoned as the legions were recalled to defend Rome itself. As the siege entered its third day, the palace was a fortress on the brink of collapse. The fires had consumed the imperial gardens, and the archives where the child had appeared were now a smoldering ruin. Burrus, his strength fading, collapsed during a skirmish at the gates, his body carried to the palace physicians alongside Vindex, who still clung to life. The Praetorians, leaderless and plagued, began to waver, some whispering of joining Drusus to escape the chaos. Livia, her whereabouts unknown since her escape, sent a new message to the palace, delivered by a cloaked acolyte. A wax tablet inscribed with a single word, Anubis. The name of the Egyptian god of death sent a chill through the court, suggesting Livia's next move would be even more devastating. Narcissus, piecing together the Parthian connection, uncovered a chilling detail. The scrolls from the temple mentioned a gift of Anubis, a coded reference to a weapon or plague brought from the east. He suspected Livia's cult had deliberately spread the disease, using infected goods or water to weaken Rome. The revelation, shared with Claudius in a tense midnight council, shifted the emperor's focus from the child to Livia's broader plot. Claudius, his voice trembling, ordered the Tiber's banks searched for signs of sabotage, but the river's stench and the city's chaos made the task impossible. The court, now a nest of suspicion, turned on itself, with Messalina accusing Narcissus of fabricating the Parthian threat to protect Agrippina, while Pallas accused Callistus of aiding Livia's escape. Agrippina, her position precarious, took a bold risk. Slipping from the palace under cover of night, she led a small band of loyalists to the Subura, seeking the hidden temple where Livia's cult was said to regroup. The streets, lit by the glow of fires, were a maze of death and despair, with plague victims begging for mercy and mobs clashing with city cohorts. Agrippina, cloaked and armed, found the temple's entrance, now guarded by fanatics chanting hymns to Isis. Inside, she discovered a cache of Parthian weapons, curved blades and vials of a strange, foul-smelling liquid. Before she could investigate further, Drusus appeared, his eyes wild with triumph. "You're too late, sister," he sneered, revealing a hidden chamber where Livia stood, her arms raised in prayer, surrounded by acolytes and a new figure. A man cloaked in black, his face scarred, holding a scroll marked with the seal of Parthia. The confrontation was cut short by a sudden explosion. A firebomb, likely Parthian in origin, that tore through the temple, collapsing its walls and engulfing the chamber in flames. Agrippina, thrown to the ground, escaped with her life, but Drusus and the scarred man vanished in the inferno, their fate unknown. Livia, untouched by the blast, fled into the Subura, her laughter echoing as she promised the child of the sun would rise. Agrippina, battered but resolute, returned to the palace with the vials, presenting them to Claudius as proof of Livia's treachery. The emperor, his trust in her restored, ordered the vials examined, but the palace physicians, overwhelmed by plague victims, confirmed the worst. The liquid was a concentrated form of the disease, designed to spread through water and air. As dawn broke over a dying Rome, the court gathered in the audience hall, the air thick with smoke and fear. Claudius, his eyes bloodshot, clutched the amulet's description, now convinced the child was the key to unraveling Livia's plot. But before he could act, a new sound pierced the chaos. A horn, deep and resonant, from the Palatine's highest tower. The court rushed to the balcony, where they saw a lone figure atop the tower, cloaked in white, holding the golden amulet aloft. It was Livia, her voice carrying over the burning city. "The child of the sun is crowned by fire, and Rome will kneel." As the mob roared in response, a new figure emerged beside her. A boy, his face now visible, bearing the unmistakable features of Germanicus, his eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. The Palatine Hill, once the glittering heart of Rome, was now a fortress wreathed in smoke and flame, its marble walls scarred by the fires of rebellion. It was 41 AD, and the empire, still reeling from Caligula's assassination, teetered on the edge of collapse. Claudius, the unlikely emperor, sat on a throne he had never sought, his scholar's mind overwhelmed by a city besieged by a mob, a plague and whispers of a hidden heir. Above the chaos, atop the highest tower of the Palatine, Livia, the priestess of Isis, stood defiant, her white robes glowing in the firelight. Beside her was a boy no older than 6, his features eerily reminiscent of Germanicus, sharp cheekbones, golden curls, and eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural light. In his small hand he clutched the golden amulet inscribed with Germanicus's name, and as Livia raised her arms, her voice thundered over the burning city. "The child of the sun is crowned by fire, and Rome will kneel." The mob below, a sea of torches and desperate faces, roared in response, their chants of Drusus, Drusus, now mingled with cries for the child of the sun. The boy, standing motionless, gazed out over Rome, his expression unreadable, as if he saw not the city but some distant vision. Claudius, watching from the palace balcony, felt a chill deeper than the autumn air. The court, gathered around him, was a tangle of fear and ambition. Messalina, her eyes blazing with defiance. Agrippina, her face a mask of calculation. Narcissus, his sharp mind racing to unravel the boy's significance. The Praetorians, their ranks decimated by plague and battle, held the palace gates, but their loyalty wavered as the mob's fervor grew. Burrus, the loyal tribune, lay dying in the palace infirmary, his fever a grim omen of Rome's fate. Livia's proclamation was no mere theatrics. It was a declaration of war. The boy, whether a true heir or a cunning impostor, was her weapon, a symbol to rally the Subura's masses and destabilize Claudius's fragile reign. The amulet, with its unmistakable link to Germanicus, lent her claim a dangerous legitimacy. Germanicus, the beloved general whose death had sparked rumors of poison and betrayal, was a ghost that haunted the Julio-Claudian dynasty. His son Caligula had briefly embodied that legacy, only to descend into madness. Now this child, proclaimed as the child of the sun, threatened to reignite old loyalties and tear Rome apart. But who was he? A lost son of Germanicus, hidden from Tiberius's purges? A Parthian pawn groomed to sow chaos? Or simply a boy chosen for his resemblance, draped in Livia's prophecies? Narcissus, ever the emperor's shadow, acted swiftly. He ordered a squad of Praetorians to scale the tower and seize Livia and the boy, but the narrow stairwells, choked with smoke and debris, slowed their advance. Livia, as if anticipating the move, vanished with the child into the labyrinthine passages of the Palatine, her acolytes covering their retreat with daggers and fire. The mob, emboldened by her defiance, surged against the palace gates, their makeshift battering rams splintering the bronze. Drusus, the escaped pretender, was at their forefront, his golden curls catching the firelight as he rallied them with promises of a new empire. His resemblance to Caligula, once a spark for rebellion, now paled beside the boy's uncanny aura, and whispers spread that Drusus was merely a decoy for Livia's true heir. Agrippina, her position in the court precarious, saw the boy as both a threat and an opportunity. Her son, Nero, was the last undisputed male heir of Germanicus's line, but the amulet and Livia's claims cast doubt on his primacy. If the boy was genuine, he could eclipse Nero. If a fraud, exposing him could cement Agrippina's loyalty to Claudius and secure her son's future. She slipped from the palace under cover of night, accompanied by Act and a handful of loyal freedmen, heading for the Subura's hidden temple of Isis. The streets were a nightmare of fire and plague, with bodies piled in alleys and the air thick with the stench of death. The temple, though damaged by the earlier raid, was still a stronghold of Livia's cult, its entrance guarded by fanatics chanting hymns to the goddess. Agrippina, cloaked and armed, infiltrated the temple, her heart pounding as she searched for clues to the boy's identity. Inside, she found a chamber littered with Parthian artifacts, curved blades, vials of the plague-inducing liquid, and a scroll inscribed with a prophecy. From the ashes of Rome, the child of the sun shall rise, guided by Isis to rule the world. The words, written in a mix of Latin and Parthian script, confirmed Narcissus's fears. Livia's rebellion was backed by Parthia, Rome's eastern rival, eager to exploit the empire's weakness. Agrippina pocketed the scroll, but her search was cut short by a scream. Act, caught by an acolyte, was dragged toward a sacrificial altar, her cries echoing through the tunnels. Agrippina, her blade flashing, fought her way to her freedwoman, but the distraction allowed Livia's followers to seal the chamber, trapping them inside. Back at the palace, Claudius struggled to hold his fracturing court together. Messalina, sensing Agrippina's absence as a chance to eliminate her rival, spread rumors that Agrippina had fled to join Livia, betraying the emperor. She produced another forged letter, this one claiming Agrippina had offered Nero as a figurehead for the rebellion. Claudius, his paranoia fed by sleepless nights and the plague's toll, ordered Agrippina's quarters sealed and her allies questioned. Pallas, the treasurer, protested, revealing that Agrippina had entrusted him with the Parthian scroll from the earlier raid, proof of her efforts to expose Livia. But Messalina's influence was stronger, and Claudius, his trust eroding, confined Pallas to the palace, leaving Callistus as the only freedman with unfettered access to the emperor. The plague, now a relentless predator, had claimed a third of Rome's population, its spread accelerated by the tainted Tiber and Livia's vials. The Palatine, once a sanctuary, was now a plague ward, with courtiers and servants alike falling to fever and sores. The Praetorians, their ranks halved, struggled to hold the gates, their loyalty fraying as the mob's assaults intensified. Drusus, now a secondary figure to Livia's boy, led a desperate charge, his voice hoarse but unyielding. The gates buckled and the mob poured into the outer courtyard, their torches setting the imperial stables ablaze. The horses, including the remnants of Caligula's beloved Incitatus, screamed as the flames consumed them, a sound that pierced Claudius's heart and fueled the court's despair. Narcissus, his spies stretched thin, uncovered a new lead. The boy's amulet matched one described in a letter from Germanicus's widow, Agrippina the Elder, written before her death in exile. The letter, hidden in the imperial archives, spoke of a hidden son, born in secret during Germanicus's campaigns in Germania and entrusted to a loyal retainer to protect him from Tiberius. The revelation, though unproven, suggested the boy could be genuine. A brother to Caligula and Agrippina, kept secret to survive the purges. Narcissus, torn between revealing the letter to Claudius and risking further chaos, hid it in his robes, his loyalty to the emperor warring with his fear of the truth. If the boy was real, his claim could unravel the Julio-Claudian dynasty. If a fraud, exposing him could end the rebellion but strengthen Agrippina's hand. In the Subura, Agrippina fought her way out of the temple, rescuing Act but losing the scroll to Livia's acolytes. The streets were a battlefield, with city cohorts clashing against the mob and plague victims crawling among the dead. Agrippina, her face streaked with ash, stumbled upon a chilling sight. A pile of children's bodies, their faces marked with sores, each clutching a small amulet resembling the one Livia's boy held. Were they decoys, sacrificed to protect the true heir, or victims of Livia's fanaticism? The discovery shook Agrippina, her resolve wavering as she realized the depth of Livia's cruelty. She sent Act to warn Claudius of the Parthian plot, but the freedwoman was intercepted by Callistus, who, sensing a shift in power, delivered her to Messalina instead. Messalina, now the dominant force in the court, used Act's capture to tighten her grip on Claudius. She presented the freedwoman as proof of Agrippina's treachery, claiming Act carried orders to crown Nero as Livia's puppet. Claudius, his mind clouded by grief and illness, ordered Agrippina's arrest upon her return, ignoring her protests and the vials she had recovered as evidence of Livia's plague weapon. Messalina's triumph was short-lived, however, as Narcissus revealed the letter from Agrippina the Elder, its words shaking the court. "My youngest son, born in the forests of Germania, lives in shadow, guarded by those loyal to Rome." The letter, though vague, lent credence to Livia's boy, and Claudius, his eyes wide with fear, ordered a city-wide search for the child, even as the palace burned. The provinces meanwhile descended into anarchy. In Britannia, Caratacus's warband sacked a Roman fort, its garrison massacred and its standards burned. In Judea, the Zealots proclaimed a new kingdom, their leader claiming divine visions of a freed Jerusalem. The Rhine legions, now openly rebellious, declared for a distant general, Galba, whose name began to circulate as a potential savior. Narcissus, desperate to hold the empire together, urged Claudius to abandon Rome and retreat to Ostia, where a fleet could carry them to safety. But Claudius, clinging to his scholarly pride, refused, insisting that Rome's heart must not fall. The decision, though noble, left the court exposed as Livia's mob tightened its grip on the city. As the fourth day of the siege dawned, the Palatine was a smoldering ruin, its once grand halls choked with ash and the cries of the dying. The Praetorians, now led by a grim centurion named Sabinus, held the inner courtyard, but their numbers were too few to repel another assault. Drusus, wounded but defiant, rallied the mob for a final push, his voice promising vengeance for Caligula's blood. Livia, her whereabouts unknown, sent a new message to the palace, delivered by a dying acolyte. A clay tablet inscribed with a map of the Palatine's secret tunnels, marked with a single word, Anubis. The word, echoing her earlier threat, suggested a final strike, perhaps a trap to lure Claudius into the labyrinth below. Narcissus, his resources exhausted, proposed a desperate plan. Use the tunnels to flank the mob and capture Livia, ending her rebellion before the boy could be crowned. Claudius, his strength fading, agreed, entrusting Sabinus with the mission. Agrippina, released from custody at Narcissus's urging, joined the expedition, her knowledge of the Subura's secrets vital to their success. The tunnels, damp and lined with ancient Etruscan carvings, were a maze of darkness, lit only by flickering torches. Agrippina, her blade drawn, led the way, her mind racing with thoughts of Nero and the boy who threatened his future. Sabinus, his face grim, whispered of omens. A raven circling the Palatine at dawn, its cries a warning of death. The tunnel expedition was a descent into chaos. Livia's acolytes, hidden in the shadows, ambushed the group, their daggers flashing in the torchlight. Agrippina fought with a ferocity that surprised even Sabinus, her blade cutting down a fanatic who clutched a vial of plague liquid. The tunnels echoed with screams and the clash of steel, as the Praetorians pushed deeper, following the map's cryptic path. At its end they found a hidden chamber, its walls adorned with frescoes of Isis and Anubis, and at its center a stone altar. On the altar lay a small bundle wrapped in white linen, its contents hidden. Agrippina, her heart pounding, approached, fearing another decoy or worse, a trap. As she unwrapped the bundle, a gasp escaped her lips. Inside was not a weapon or a relic, but a collection of letters, each bearing the seal of Germanicus's household. The letters, written in Agrippina the elder's hand, detailed the birth of a son in Germania, hidden by loyal retainers and entrusted to a priestess of Isis in Alexandria. The final letter, stained with blood, named the boy Gaius Julius, born in 35 AD, a year after Germanicus's death, conceived during a secret reunion with Agrippina the elder before her exile. The revelation was staggering. A posthumous son, hidden for years, now wielded by Livia as a weapon against Rome. But where was the boy himself? Before Agrippina could process the discovery, the chamber shook with a low rumble as if the earth itself groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling and Sabinus shouted a warning. A trap, set by Livia to bury them alive. The Praetorians scrambled for the exit, but the tunnel collapsed behind them, trapping Agrippina and Sabinus in the chamber. As the air grew thick with dust, a child's voice echoed once more, singing the hymn to Isis, its melody hauntingly clear. The boy, Livia's child of the sun, stepped from the shadows, his eyes glowing with that same otherworldly light, but now accompanied by a new figure. A Parthian warrior, his face scarred and his hand gripping a curved blade. "Rome will burn," the warrior said, his voice thick with an Eastern accent, "and the child will rule its ashes." The air in the tunnel was thick with dust and the acrid stench of smoke, the walls trembling as the collapse sealed Agrippina and Sabinus in a subterranean tomb beneath the Palatine. The faint glow of a fallen torch cast eerie shadows on the frescoes of Isis and Anubis, their painted eyes seeming to watch the unfolding drama. Agrippina, her stola torn and her blade still clutched in her bloodied hand, faced the Parthian warrior, his scarred face twisted into a grim smile. Beside him stood the boy, no older than 6, his golden curls and sharp features mirroring those of Germanicus, his eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. In his small hand, the golden amulet inscribed with Germanicus's name gleamed, a symbol of a legacy that threatened to tear Rome apart. "Rome will burn," the warrior said, his voice heavy with a Parthian accent, "and the child will rule its ashes." Above, the Palatine was a fortress under siege, its marble halls choked with the smoke of rebellion and the cries of a city dying to plague. It was 41 AD, and Claudius, the scholar emperor, clung to a throne he had never sought, his court fractured by betrayal and ambition. Livia, the priestess of Isis, had vanished after her proclamation atop the tower, her child of the sun, now a spectre haunting Rome's sleepless nights. The mob, led by the escaped pretender Drusus, battered the palace gates, their chants of divine retribution drowning out the pleas of the plague-stricken. The empire, already fraying under Caligula's madness, now faced a Parthian-backed conspiracy, with the boy's claim to Germanicus's blood threatening to ignite a civil war. Agrippina, her heart pounding, tightened her grip on her blade, her eyes locked on the Parthian. Sabinus, his armor dented and his face pale with exhaustion, stepped beside her, his gladius raised. "Name yourself," Agrippina demanded, her voice steady despite the collapsing tunnel's tremors. The warrior laughed, his curved blade glinting as he gestured to the boy. "This is Gaius Julius, son of Germanicus, hidden by Isis to reclaim Rome. I am Arsaces, servant of the Parthian king, here to ensure his destiny." The boy, silent but unyielding, stared at Agrippina, his gaze unervingly calm, as if he saw through her ambitions for her own son, Nero. The letters Agrippina had found, written by Germanicus's widow, Agrippina the Elder, lent weight to Arsaces's claim. They spoke of a secret son, born in Germania and hidden from Tiberius's purges, entrusted to a priestess in Alexandria. But Agrippina, daughter of Germanicus herself, knew the family's secrets better than most. Her mother's letters, though compelling, lacked detail, and the boy's age, 6 years in 41 AD, did not align perfectly with Germanicus's death in 19 AD. Was he a true heir, conceived in a fleeting reunion, or a Parthian forgery crafted to exploit Rome's chaos? Agrippina's mind raced, weighing the risk of exposing him against the danger of letting Livia's cult crown him. The tunnel shook again, dislodging stones from the ceiling. Sabinus lunged at Arsaces, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. Agrippina, seizing the moment, grabbed the boy, pulling him toward the altar. "If you're Germanicus's son," she whispered, her blade at his throat, "prove it." The boy's eyes, still glowing, met hers without fear. "Isis knows my blood," he said, his voice soft but resonant, "and Rome will know it too." Before Agrippina could press further, Arsaces broke free from Sabinus, slashing the centurion's arm and forcing Agrippina to release the boy. The Parthian grabbed the child and fled into a side passage, his laughter echoing as the tunnel groaned under another collapse. Agrippina and Sabinus, coughing in the dust, scrambled to the altar, where the torch's fading light revealed a hidden trapdoor. With no time to hesitate, they pried it open, dropping into a lower tunnel that reeked of damp earth and decay. The passage, lined with ancient Etruscan runes, stretched toward the Tiber, its walls slick with moss and the faint stench of plague-tainted water. Agrippina, her resolve hardened, led the way, her blade ready for whatever lay ahead. Sabinus, blood seeping from his wound, followed, his loyalty to Claudius, and perhaps to Agrippina, keeping him upright despite his pain. "If that boy is real," he muttered, "he could end us all." Agrippina, her thoughts on Nero, said nothing, but her silence was a vow to protect her son's claim at any cost. Above ground, the Palatine was a battlefield. The mob, fueled by Drusus's charisma and Livia's prophecies, had breached the inner courtyard, their torches setting the imperial tapestries ablaze. The Praetorians, now led by a dwindling band of loyalists, fought desperately, their swords slick with blood. Claudius, barricaded in the audience hall, clutched the letter from Agrippina the elder, its words haunting him. "My youngest son, born in the forests of Germania, lives in shadow." Narcissus, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos, urged the emperor to flee to Ostia, where a fleet could carry them to safety. But Claudius, his scholar's pride outweighing his fear, refused, insisting that Rome's heart must not fall. Messalina, her influence waning as Agrippina's absence fueled suspicion, pressed for harsher measures, demanding the execution of all suspected traitors, including Pallas and Callistus. Narcissus, however, uncovered a new clue in the palace's burned-out archives. A charred scroll, overlooked in the chaos, bearing the seal of a Parthian envoy named Phraates. The scroll detailed a pact between Livia's cult and Parthia, promising gold and weapons in exchange for installing a divine heir to destabilize Rome. The boy, it claimed, was not Germanicus's son but a Parthian prince, groomed from birth to resemble the Julio-Claudian line, his otherworldly eyes the result of a rare herb used in Parthian rituals. The revelation, if true, meant Livia's rebellion was a foreign plot, not a dynastic struggle, and the boy was a puppet, not an heir. Narcissus, torn between revealing the scroll and risking panic, shared it with Claudius in private, urging him to expose the boy publicly to crush the rebellion. The plague, now a merciless scourge, had turned Rome into a city of the dead. The Tiber, choked with corpses, spread the disease to every quarter, and the Palatine's water supply, tainted by Livia's vials, claimed even the healthiest courtiers. The Forum, once a stage for oratory, was now a mass grave, with priests abandoning their temples and augurs declaring the god's wrath unstoppable. The Senate, still meeting in the Temple of Jupiter, was divided. Lucius Vitellius, swayed by Agrippina's bribes, urged loyalty to Claudius, while others, fearing the empire's collapse, whispered of a new republic. The provinces, too, unraveled. In Britannia, Caratacus's warband burned Roman settlements, their fires visible from the coast. In Judea, the Zealots proclaimed a holy war, their leader claiming divine visions. And on the Rhine, Galba's name grew louder among the legions, a beacon for those who saw Claudius as unfit. In the tunnels, Agrippina and Sabinus pressed deeper, the sound of rushing water growing louder. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber beneath the Tiber's banks, where a makeshift altar to Isis stood, surrounded by Parthian weapons and vials of plague liquid. Livia was there, her white robes stained with blood, chanting a hymn as her acolytes prepared a ritual. The boy, Gaius Julius, stood at her side, his amulet glowing faintly, his eyes fixed on a stone statue of Anubis, its jackal head gleaming in the torchlight. Arsaces, the Parthian warrior, guarded the entrance, his blade drawn, but Agrippina, driven by desperation, charged forward, her own blade clashing against his. Sabinus, weakened by his wound, joined the fight, his gladius striking with precision despite his fading strength. The battle was fierce but brief. Agrippina, her fury fueled by the threat to Nero, disarmed Arsaces, her blade slicing his wrist. The Parthian fell, cursing in his native tongue as Sabinus restrained him. Livia, her chant unbroken, turned to Agrippina, her eyes wild with fanaticism. "You cannot stop the will of Isis," she hissed, raising a vial of plague liquid as if to unleash it. Agrippina, quicker, knocked the vial from her hand, shattering it against the altar. The boy, unmoved, stepped forward, his voice soft but commanding. "Rome is mine," he said, "and Nero will kneel." The words, spoken with a chilling certainty, shook Agrippina, but before she could respond, the cavern trembled, the Tiber's waters seeping through cracks in the walls. The chamber began to flood, the icy water rising swiftly. Sabinus, dragging Arsaces, urged Agrippina to flee, but Livia seized the boy and vanished into a side passage, her laughter echoing as the water surged. Agrippina, clutching the letters from the altar, followed Sabinus through the collapsing tunnel, their path lit only by the dying torch. They emerged near the Tiber's banks, soaked and battered, to find Rome in flames. The mob, now uncontrollable, had overrun the Palatine's outer defenses, and Drusus, wounded but defiant, led them toward the audience hall. Agrippina, her resolve unbroken, sent Sabinus to warn Claudius, while she slipped into the city, determined to find Livia and the boy before they could crown him. At the palace, Claudius faced a court on the brink of collapse. Messalina, her power slipping, accused Narcissus of hiding the Parthian scroll to protect Agrippina, while Callistus, ever the opportunist, offered to lead a cohort against the mob in exchange for favor. Narcissus, revealing the scroll, urged Claudius to address the people, exposing the boy as a Parthian fraud to quell the rebellion. But Claudius, his health failing under the strain, collapsed, his breath shallow and his face feverish. The court, leaderless, descended into chaos, with Messalina seizing temporary control, ordering the Praetorians to execute Drusus and any suspected traitors. The order, rash and brutal, alienated even her allies, as the Senate learned of her actions and began to rally against her. Agrippina, navigating the burning streets, tracked Livia to a hidden safe house in the Subura, its entrance marked by the symbol of Anubis. Inside she found Livia alone, the boy gone, her face serene despite the chaos. "You seek Gaius Julius," Livia said, her voice calm, "but he is already beyond your reach, with those who will crown him in Alexandria." Agrippina, enraged, demanded answers, but Livia's smile was enigmatic. "The plague was our gift," she whispered, "and the boy is our future." Before Agrippina could act, Livia swallowed a vial of poison, collapsing with a final hymn to Isis on her lips. The safe house, rigged with Parthian firebombs, erupted in flames, forcing Agrippina to flee, her only clue a scrap of papyrus clutched in Livia's hand. A map to Alexandria, marked with the seal of Phraates. Back at the Palatine, Sabinus reached Claudius, delivering Agrippina's warning and the letters from the altar. The emperor, revived by physicians, read the letters with trembling hands, their words confirming the boy's possible legitimacy but also Livia's Parthian ties. Narcissus, seizing the moment, proposed a desperate gambit: send a fleet to Alexandria to intercept the boy before he could be crowned, while rallying the Senate to declare martial law and crush the mob. Messalina, her influence crumbling, opposed the plan, fearing it would elevate Agrippina. But Claudius, his resolve hardened by the letters, sided with Narcissus, ordering the fleet prepared and Agrippina recalled to lead the mission, her loyalty now his only hope. As the fleet was readied at Ostia, Rome burned, its streets a graveyard of plague and rebellion. The mob, leaderless with Drusus's capture, began to fracture, some fleeing the plague, others joining the Senate's call for order. The provinces, however, were lost. Britannia fell to Caratacus, Judea to the Zealots, and the Rhine legions to Galba's growing faction. Claudius, his empire crumbling, stood on the palace balcony, his voice trembling as he addressed the remnants of the crowd, promising justice and bread. But his words were drowned out by a new sound, a horn sharp and mournful from the Tiber's banks. From the river emerged a lone ship, its sails black and its prow adorned with the jackal head of Anubis. At its helm stood the boy, Gaius Julius, his amulet gleaming, flanked by Parthian warriors and a figure in white. A woman, her face veiled, but her voice unmistakable as Livia's. "Rome is fallen," she proclaimed, her words carrying over the water, "and the child of the sun rises in the east." The court, watching from the balcony, froze as Claudius realized the truth. Livia had faked her death, and the boy, whether heir or fraud, was now beyond his reach, sailing to Alexandria to claim an empire Rome could no longer hold. The Tiber's waters churned under a blood-red dawn, reflecting the flames that consumed Rome's heart. It was late 41 AD, and the Palatine Hill, once the radiant seat of imperial power, was a smoldering ruin, its marble halls scarred by fire and rebellion. Claudius, the scholar emperor, stood on the palace balcony, his trembling hands clutching a tattered scroll from Agrippina the Elder, its words haunted by the specter of a hidden heir. Below, the city was a graveyard, its streets choked with plague-ridden corpses and the echoes of a mob now fractured by despair. Livia, the priestess of Isis, had escaped on a black-sailed ship, her voice proclaiming the boy Gaius Julius, the child of the sun, as Rome's true ruler, sailing to Alexandria with Parthian warriors to crown him in the east. The empire, frayed by Caligula's madness and Claudius's faltering reign, teetered on the edge of oblivion. Agrippina the Younger, her stola stained with ash and blood, stood at Claudius's side, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Livia's ship had vanished. Her son, Nero, the last undisputed heir of Germanicus's line, clung to her hand, his 5-year-old face pale but resolute. The boy on the ship, proclaimed as Gaius Julius, son of Germanicus, threatened Nero's claim and Rome's fragile stability. Agrippina, her ambition unyielding, had convinced Claudius to send her to Alexandria, leading a fleet to intercept Livia and expose the boy as a Parthian fraud. The letters found in the temple, written by her mother, Agrippina the Elder, spoke of a secret son hidden from Tiberius's purges, but Agrippina doubted their truth. The boy's age, 6 years, did not align with Germanicus's death, and the Parthian scroll uncovered by Narcissus suggested a foreign prince, groomed to destabilize Rome. Her mission was clear: secure Nero's future or die trying. Claudius, his health failing under the strain of plague and betrayal, leaned heavily on Narcissus, his sharp-witted freedman. The court, once a labyrinth of ambition, was now a shadow of itself. Messalina, her power broken by Agrippina's return, faced accusations of treason, her forged letters exposed by Pallas, the treasurer. Callistus, ever the opportunist, had fled the city, his loyalty as fleeting as the Tiber's tides. The Praetorians, their ranks decimated, held the palace under Sabinus, the centurion who had survived the tunnel collapse with Agrippina. The Senate, cowering in the Temple of Jupiter, debated surrender as the provinces fell, Britannia to Caratacus, Judea to the Zealots, and the Rhine to Galba's growing rebellion. Rome, the eternal city, was a husk, its people sleepless with fear, its gods silent in the face of plague and fire. Agrippina's fleet, a ragtag assembly of triremes and merchant ships, sailed from Ostia under a storm-darkened sky. The plague had ravaged the crews and desertions were rampant, but Agrippina's charisma held them together. She stood at the prow of the lead ship, her hair whipping in the wind, clutching the Parthian scroll and the map to Alexandria found in Livia's safe house. Sabinus, his arm bandaged but his resolve unbroken, served as her second-in-command, his loyalty torn between Claudius's orders and Agrippina's magnetic presence. The journey was perilous. Storms battered the fleet and Parthian pirates, alerted to their mission, harassed their flanks. Agrippina, sleepless and driven, pored over the letters, searching for clues to the boy's identity. The mention of Alexandria and a priestess of Isis suggested a deeper conspiracy, one tied to the city's powerful cult and its Parthian allies. In Rome, Claudius waged a final battle to save the city. The mob, leaderless since Drusus's capture, had splintered, some fleeing the plague, others looting the ruins. Narcissus, wielding the Parthian scroll, addressed the Senate, revealing Livia's plot as a foreign scheme to crown a false heir. The revelation rallied the senators, with Lucius Vitellius leading a call to arms, urging the city cohorts to clear the forum and restore order. Claudius, his voice trembling but clear, spoke to the people from the palace steps, promising bread and justice if they stood with him. The gesture, though desperate, swayed some, and the forum's fires began to die as the cohorts pushed back the remnants of Livia's mob. But the plague, unrelenting, claimed more lives each day, and the Tiber's tainted waters spread death faster than the soldiers could bury the dead. In Alexandria, Livia's ship docked under the shadow of the Pharos lighthouse, its beacon a mocking symbol of Rome's fading glory. The city, a jewel of the empire, buzzed with unrest, its streets filled with worshippers of Isis and merchants whispering of Parthian gold. Livia, her white robes now adorned with golden threads, led a procession to the Serapeum, Alexandria's grand temple to Serapis and Isis. The boy, Gaius Julius, walked beside her, his amulet gleaming, his eyes still glowing with that eerie light. The crowd, a mix of Egyptian priests and Parthian envoys, hailed him as the child of the sun, their chants drowning out the cries of Roman loyalists. Livia's plan was clear: crown the boy as emperor in Alexandria, declare it the new capital, and rally the eastern provinces against Rome with Parthia's support. Agrippina's fleet arrived days later, battered but intact. Disguised as a merchant, she infiltrated the city with Sabinus and a small band of loyalists, their faces hidden beneath cloaks. The Serapeum was a fortress, its halls guarded by Parthian warriors and Isis acolytes. Agrippina, guided by the map, slipped into a hidden chamber beneath the temple, where she found a cache of Parthian documents, letters between Livia and Phraates, the Parthian envoy, detailing the boy's training in Ctesiphon. The documents confirmed Narcissus's fears. Gaius Julius was no Julio Claudian but a Parthian prince, his resemblance to Germanicus crafted through careful breeding and herbal rituals that gave his eyes their unnatural glow. The letters of Agrippina the Elder, it seemed, were forgeries, planted to lend legitimacy to Livia's scheme. The coronation was set for the Ides of October, a date chosen for its symbolic weight. Agrippina, her time running out, devised a desperate plan: expose the boy during the ceremony, using the Parthian documents to turn the crowd against Livia. Sabinus, skeptical but loyal, agreed, securing a vantage point in the Serapeum's upper galleries. As the ceremony began, Livia raised the amulet, proclaiming Gaius Julius the divine heir of Rome and Isis. The boy, dressed in a golden toga, stepped forward, his voice echoing with a rehearsed speech of unity and power. Agrippina, hidden among the worshippers, waited for her moment, her heart pounding as Parthian guards scanned the crowd. Sabinus struck first, his men cutting down the temple guards in a swift, bloody clash. Agrippina surged forward, climbing the altar steps, and tore the amulet from the boy's neck, holding it aloft. "This is no heir of Germanicus," she shouted, her voice carrying over the stunned crowd. "He is a Parthian puppet bred to destroy Rome." She thrust the documents into the air, their seals glinting in the torchlight. The crowd, torn between devotion and doubt, wavered, but Livia's voice cut through the chaos. "Blasphemer!" she cried, drawing a dagger and lunging at Agrippina. Sabinus intervened, his blade blocking hers, but the boy, seizing the moment, slipped into the crowd, his small form vanishing among the worshippers. The Serapeum erupted in chaos. Parthian warriors clashed with Agrippina's men, their curved blades flashing against Roman steel. The crowd, divided, turned on itself, some chanting for Isis, others for Rome. Agrippina, her stola splattered with blood, fought her way to Livia, their blades meeting in a duel that echoed the court's rivalries. "You've lost," Agrippina hissed, her strength fueled by years of survival. Livia, her fanaticism unbroken, laughed. "The boy is gone and Rome is ashes," she said, before Agrippina's blade found her heart. Livia fell, her white robes pooling red, her final breath a whispered hymn to Isis. The boy, however, was nowhere to be found. Agrippina, searching the temple, discovered a hidden passage leading to the docks, where a Parthian ship waited. The boy had escaped, spirited away by Phraates' men, his fate now a mystery. Agrippina, clutching the amulet and the documents, returned to her fleet, her mission a bitter victory. She had exposed the plot but lost the boy, leaving a shadow over Nero's claim. The journey back to Rome was grim, the fleet battered by storms and the crew ravaged by plague. Sabinus, his wound infected, died at sea, his body committed to the waves with a soldier's honor. In Rome, Claudius's reign was crumbling. The plague had claimed half the city, and the Senate, now led by Lucius Vitellius, declared martial law, but it was too late. The provinces were lost. Britannia, Judea, and the Rhine had fallen to rebels, and Galba's legions marched on Italy, proclaiming him emperor. Claudius, his health broken, retreated to the imperial library, his only solace the histories he had once loved. Narcissus, loyal to the end, guarded him, but Messalina, her treachery exposed, fled the city, only to be captured and executed by the Senate's order. Pallas, the last freedman standing, took control of the treasury, funneling its remnants to Agrippina's returning fleet. Agrippina arrived in Ostia, to a city of ghosts. The Palatine was a blackened ruin, its halls silent save for the moans of the dying. Claudius, barely alive, welcomed her, his eyes brightening at the sight of Nero. "You've saved us," he whispered, clutching the amulet. Agrippina, her face unreadable, presented the Parthian documents, proving the boy's fraud. But the victory was hollow. Rome was broken, its empire shattered. Claudius, in his final act, named Nero his heir, ensuring Agrippina's triumph but tying her to a dying throne. That night, as Claudius slipped into a fevered sleep, Agrippina sat by his side, her mind already plotting Nero's ascension. The empire did not recover. Galba's legions reached Rome, but the plague claimed him before he could claim the throne. The year of the 4 emperors loomed as warlords vied for power in a fractured world. Agrippina, with Nero at her side, ruled as regent, her cunning holding Rome's remnants together. The boy, Gaius Julius, vanished into the east, his name a whisper in Parthian courts, a ghost that haunted Rome's dreams. The amulet, now in Agrippina's possession, was locked away, its secrets buried with the ashes of a dying empire. Yet in the Subura's ruins a new cult emerged, worshipping the child of the sun as a messiah who would return. On sleepless nights, Romans swore they heard a boy's voice, singing hymns to Isis, echoing from the Tiber's banks. The madness of Caligula had ended, but its legacy lingered, a fever that burned in Rome's heart, a reminder that empires like men could fall to their own desires.